Then with that, it is time to transition on over to Homegrow. We'll be doing our Homegrow session here until our lunch break, which will be at 12:15. So from now until 12:15, we're going to be talking about Homegrow. John Kingsbury, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to talk a little bit about. I'm going to do a little setup actually before I hand it over to you.
Okay.
Um, Oh, there's so much to say about Homegrow. And that is, I think there were lots of egregious oversights when the language for how actually I-502 is going to be written in happened. I think Homegrow, though, like is top of the list of the most egregious things. I get to talk to a lot of people across the country, and my two favorite things, just in terms of the ways people react, that I get to say is that we don't allow home grow here in Washington State, and that everybody kind of goes, well, but not that much. There are two other states that don't allow for home grow, and sort of a a fourth state that's borderline doesn't allow for it. Um, but then when I let them know that it is not just that we don't allow it, it's a Class C felony to grow a single plant if you're not a patient here in Washington State. And that's sort of when everybody loses their mind. So we've been working very hard for a very long time to change that. We are moving forward with a little bit of a different strategy. So, John, when you introduce this, I think what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about 1449 as it sits in the House. And then let's talk a little bit about what we're working on in the Senate. I'll put the one pager in the chat here in just a minute.
Sure.
You'll see that it has House Bill 1449, which is the current vehicle that's filed, so that you all have reference for that. But as soon as we get a Senate bill number on our legislative packet and on this one pager, we're going to be featuring the Senate bill. As you remember from this morning, we are, because of the challenges that we are having in the House, it has a lot more to do with personalities than the actual content of the bill. We're going to be focusing all of our efforts over on the Senate side. So with that, John, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you wouldn't mind talking a little bit first, introduce yourself and talk a little bit about why Homegrow, why you're so passionate about Homegrow.
Uh, okay. My name's John Kingsbury. I have been chairing the patient committee. I am a patient myself um, for, I don't know, 2018, 2017. I've been working on home grow at some level or another for 10 years. Um, I can't tell you the first time I was the driving force. I'm going to say 2017. This has been a long difficult learning experience. Um, why I'm passionate about it. I have to tell you, when I was a patient, well, I am a patient. As a patient, when um, I started growing for medicine and learning about the medicinal qualities, which meant experimenting with a lot of strains. Um, but the other part of it was I learned to really love the process of growing. And I think that when I talk to a lot of people, legislators, they miss that part of it. That it is a hobby in itself it's not like growing tomatoes. I've grown roses. It is infinitely more complicated than that. So there's just the loving the process of the growing and loving the plant is part of it. Um, the utter ridiculousness of it being illegal, the substance you can go buy, like beer, is a Class C felony. I find that I'm a little indignant about that, so that also fuels me. Um, um, yeah, I am frustrated by the fact that this has been such a long fight, and the misunderstandings that I run into. But I've also learned an immense amount, and I think that that brings us closer. And I there are legislators 6 years ago who would just sort of go, you know, we're not going to do it. But over the years, as we've become more familiar with each other, I see that they've softened up. They get that there's something driving this besides I want to have more weed. They get that it's not just a way to get weed, that there's something more behind it. So I do have hope. Um, There, I'm going to ask you to turn your hymnals to HB 1449. If you go, let's see, 1139, is this it? Yeah. Do we have that up there? What do we have here?
Sorry, what are you asking about? So I saw that you put in the chat one of our planning documents talking about sort of the elements of the bill that we would like to see. And then what I've put into the chat is the one pager that we've been sharing with policymakers as well.
Okay, so I'm going to, for those of you who are just learning about the legislative process, I'm going to start here because this is a useful thing to know. This is the tracking page, and for any bill you're tracking, um, you're going to want to you're going to want to follow these because you'll see there's a little chart about where the bill has been or where it's going to be, and so
I'm
it's a useful tool. I'm
gonna
going
do
to
this
ask you
really
to,
quick, John. Everybody can see it's on the shared. So do you want can we just do a little quick tour of the landing page?
sure,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you'll see this bill status at a glance. So each bill, when you go to and please ignore my tabs, when you go to the homepage of the legislature, you'll see this here, of which there's a lot of interesting information. So that's super interesting. Joint Oregon-Washington Legislative Action Committee happened this morning. I'll check in on that. But you can just put a bill number in. Also, a little side note, anything that starts over in the House always starts with a five, six, or I don't know that they ever get up to seven, but it's a four-digit number, and we'll start with a five. And then once they've run through, they've gotten 1,000 bills done. Sometimes it'll be six. So you'll see in this legislative session, um,
It's in the Senate, Caitlin.
in the Senate, sorry, what did I say, House?
Yeah.
I'm confusing everybody. Okay. And then in the house, it's a one or a two. I don't think I've seen any threes, maybe a three or once or twice. But so you can always say House bill or Senate bill, but you don't necessarily need to know that because you're going to know by the number whether it's the Senate or the House. All right. Okay, so status bill at a glance. Everything at the end of the last legislative session, I went back to the House of Origin and the last committee that it was in that House of Origin. So for 1449, that's in the House Appropriations Committee. You can see where in the process it is. This cool little Gantt chart going. Then you can see the bill history where it will show everything that happened has happened along the way. And in here, there was a substitute bill put in, which we'll talk about here in just a couple of minutes, where there were a bunch of amendments. And there were so many amendments that rather than keeping the original bill and just amending it, that they did a House substitute bill. So they added all those amendments in and then just sort of replaced the language there. You can see here, there's the original bill, which will take you straight there. And then also the substitute bill. Not saying one way or the other what we get up to over here or what I get up to over here, but if you are okay with AI, there are a couple AI engines that you could put both of those two bills in and say, tell me the difference between these two, which is really helpful. Additionally, there's bill reports. Not all bills will have a report, but this is what is often given to the committees. I will say there are plenty of committee members who never read the actual bill. They rely on these bill reports to help them make decisions. So it's important for us to know what's in the bill report because that's the part that we want to speak to first, just in case we're talking to folks who this is all they know about the bill. And by the way, these are people that are voting on these bills. But they are, and in particular, Peter Clodfelter, who is staff for House Consumer Protection and Business, is excellent. So he
Right.
usually does a really great job. And so it's just sort of a shortened version and a little bit more plain English about what the bill does and doesn't do. And in this particular case, we also got a House bill report on that substitute bill, which is really helpful. Then fiscal notes. We won't get into how we read a fiscal note right now exactly, but I'll just give you a glance at those because they look a little. So this one has had several fiscal notes. Let's see, the most recent one, which is also the most atrocious one.
Yeah, what did that come to?
Let's see. So in total, so this one has on here, I think this is like the education part, which we have to 833,000. And then it looks like about 324 every year after that. That's one. Let's see, judicial didn't add anything extra. I don't know where the LCB's won, which was a gajillion dollars. So you can see there's all kinds of information in here. So what happens is once a bill is written, it goes out to all relevant agencies, and those relevant agencies are asked to describe how much they think it's going to cost to implement that bill. And that's what a fiscal note is. Let's see. Okay. So the amendments that went on to this bill included like traceability through LCB, which is sort of a wild turn of events. And so if you can imagine, and I don't know that it's in here, and you don't necessarily need to watch me scroll through that, but when I say a gajillion dollars, I mean a gajillion dollars because LCB sort of said, well, if you need us to create a whole new traceability system for regular citizens tracking home grow, that's going to cost more money than is available in the universe. I'm obviously $1.4 million. Sorry, 1.48. So closer to $1.5 million. And then as you see, as I'm scrolling through, all of these are different reports. And so in order to then understand the fiscal note, you have to then add up each agency's sort
No.
of description of how much that money would cost. So as you can imagine, the current version of House Bill 1449 is dead in the water, no go moving forward. Then also really cool that we have TVW. They also attach here at the bottom videos of each of the hearings on that bill. So you can go back and click on this House Consumer Protection and Business is the actual full hearing where you'll get to see John testify, myself, and a few others, and hear all of the testimony that went into that home grow bill. Then the second House Consumer Protection and Business was the executive committee vote on it. So when you watch that hearing, you will see committee members sort of speaking to the amendments and the reasons that they wanted those amendments to happen. There's no testimony there. Executive decision making sometimes happens, a lot of that happens behind closed doors, and then when they come back in to vote on things like amendments and whether or not they want to pass it out of committee, that is done in public, and sometimes there's comments there. This one was like a really super spicy one, so
Yeah.
if you like inside baseball, that February 21st one is a good one to watch. And then it did make it out of committee and then went to appropriations where all of these really unworkable fiscal notes were attached to it. And you can sort of watch all of us fighting for our lives, trying to give testimony in House appropriations as well. All right, John, I'll let you pick up from there.
So it's talking about um, just stopping things and making things go. And so what we saw in a lot of this bill in the substitute was not an attempt to improve the bill, but rather amendments to kill it. Poison pills, I guess. So, but that was a really, really good walkthrough. Caitlin, I appreciate that. Um, the she referred to the House report, but I'm gonna turn a little bit here, and where are we at here? Where did I put the checklist? Where are we at here, Bill? So these are some of the elements that we started with. As Caitlin said, here, let me get in order here. Post this up. I'm going to ask you to bring this up because this will help the conversation be more clear. As Caitlin said, um, the the House substitute bill is, it's basically going to be dead. So what we're trying to do um, on the Senate side is start with the original 1449 and introduce it there, and then they will have to be reconciled at the end. We talked about that. Either the 1440, the Senate version of 1449 will um, either come back to commerce or excuse me, regulated substances, or if by some strange chance the substitute bill of 1449 advances in the House, then they'll have to be reconciled somehow. But I'm going to turn to this document that I just posted the site for. It's called Bill Elements, and these are what was given to Saldana um, when Kate now first approached her about doing a companion. Now, a companion bill means that the language in the House bill has to match the language in the Senate bill. Um, I'm not sure how that works once there's a substitute bill. If we can go back to the original 1449, that's is Al around? Is he gone? Um, but what's important here are the elements that are in this, because the elements that we started with or proposed Saldana with are really in this bill. And what I want you to notice is that a lot of it is based on allaying fears. One thing I've noticed in working on Homegrow is I spend a lot of time calming fears, you know. Um, and so the bill started to get written based upon what were the objections we heard? Can we address those objections? So here, just to describe the elements of the bill, it's 6 plants per adult. The reason for that 6 plant number is that's mostly what other states do. One state does 4 plants, that's Oregon. I think Michigan does 12 plants, but basically most states do six. That may not be a good reason, but it does matter with selling the bill. Um, it's very hard to grow 4 plants, I found. Um, and 12 will just scare too many people. Um, the maximum number of plants you can have in a house is 15. That's sort of an odd number because you'd think, well, that means if there's 3 adults in the house, they may be allowed 6 plants each, but they can't have more than 15 total. So somebody gets shorted somehow. If there's 1 adult in the house, you get 6 plants. If there's 2 adults, who can grow, you only get 12 plants, but the maximum is 15. And the reason for that number is because it aligns with home growing. Medical grows. You can't have more than 15 in a house that is currently authorized to grow 15. And so it's an enforcement thing. It just makes enforcement easier. That's where that number comes from. Does everybody understand how the maximum works? It's 6 plants per adult, no more than 15 in a house. No adult can have more than six um, plants attributed to them.
So, in
Um,
other words, if we had 3 adults, all with the medical authorization, even though we're each allowed 6 plants, we all live in the same house together, we still can't go over 15 plants for the entire household.
that's the rule for medical grows.
Mhm.
And I've seen this a lot. You may have seen the note I sent last night if you had the time to actually read any of your mail this morning. Um, One thing I've seen a lot with patients, and I won't belabor this, I've gotten calls from lots of patients where there were 2 adults, 2 medical patients who had gone into the registry and were both qualified to carry 15 plants, and they thought they could grow 30. And then the police show up on their door, and they thought they did everything right um, because they misunderstood the law. It is 15 plants under any condition, no more than 15 plants under any conditions, matter how many adults, no matter how many medical plants, just 15. And that just is for enforcement to keep the rules the same and to try and reduce confusion. Um, it's also in 1449 and was on our list that growing has to be in the housing unit of um, the owner of the plants. So I can't grow 6 plants at my neighbor's house, or I can't grow 6 plants at somewhere other than where I live. Um, the next item is decriminalization. So a big part of the discussion has been over the past few years has been social equity. A few years ago, I did an analysis of whether there was a disparity of um, enforcement of home grow sized activity, um, which would be 6 plants or fewer, or 15 for a plant with multiple adults. And what I discovered is that if if you're black, you are 5 times more likely on average over like a 12-year period. Some years it might be 7 times, some years it might be 4 times more likely than a white person, but on average, 5 times more likely than a white person to be arrested for growing 6 plants or fewer. Um, if you're Hispanic, um, it was 2.4 times more likely than a white person. So there's a clear um, social there's a clear disparity of enforcement. That's a very important value to a lot of legislators, which I think is a good thing to look at, you know. But this disparity of enforcement is clearly there. It's clearly shown. The other thing that I learned while doing this study was that um, if you were black and you got arrested for 6 plants, you're going to get taken to jail. If you're white, you're going to get a notice to appear. So just the way it's handled was quite disparate and still is. I think that's a strong argument beyond. I think it's good to grow plants, or this is a right we should have, is to reduce that inequity. What's been done here? What Clova said. This is what Clova wanted to do was she wanted to reduce the penalties. They talked about a Class C felony um, for growing one plant now. However, if the previous bills had passed, you could grow, if you grew 6 plants, that would be legal. If you grew 7 plants, it was still a Class C felony. That's sort of that just doesn't quite make sense. So what Cloba decided to do is say, if you're growing 7 to 15 plants, that's against the law, but it's just going to be a class one civil infraction, which is not a crime, but it is a pretty, I think it's $1,000 fine or $250 fine. I'd have to look that up again. It's a pretty stiff fine, but you're not going to go to jail. And that makes a lot more sense, I think. That also, I haven't analyzed that, but that also should have a pretty strong social equity impact. So, um, public view and odor. So there's a class 3 civil infraction in the bill, um, which is a $50 fine. So no public view. Your neighbors can't see your plants, and um, you're not supposed to be able to smell it at the edge of the property. These are the same rules for your 502 producer and medical grows. As a patient, those restrictions are on me. Um, I notice if I drive by Northwest Cannabis Solutions, you can smell them 3 blocks away. Nobody gets upset, right? I have a neighbor down the street, and every September, I know when his plants are flowering because I can smell them. Nobody in 20 years has gotten upset with the guy, but if somebody wants to complain, they're subject to a $50 fine. One part of that that may be um, reassuring to more prohibitionist legislators is that creates a potential entry for police to examine the plants. Um, so um, I think the odor of 6 plants is pretty easy to control. Um, the odor from 45 plants, I know from personal experience, is a lot harder in a residential neighborhood. So public view and odor are very, very normal, and those are written to align with the 502 requirements and with the medical grow requirements. So I think a lot of the consideration here is there going to be one rule for growers, for medical growers and recreational growers, and if a policeman comes up, are they going to be confused? And there's a lot of effort to um, eliminate any sort of confusion and make enforcement easy and hopefully uh, give police, if for some reason they show up, a lot of excuses to just walk away, um, which I think will probably happen anyway. Um,
I do want to, John, just sort of flag that we've got about 15 minutes left.
okay.
And want to make sure that if folks have questions, feel free to sort of raise your hand and jump
Okay. I haven't been looking for questions. I've just been talking. So if somebody raises their hands, maybe you can cue me in
in. For sure.
because I'm looking at my sheet, not at the screen. So.
Yeah, of course.
So what about the children? We've always hear that. So again, a lot of this is written by meeting of objections and trying to allay fears. Um, no growing in daycares or foster homes. Those are less stable environments. One objection you hear a lot is, okay, if you're going to grow in the home, then children will have access to that. Um, well, okay. There's a couple of responses to that. Number one, a home where people will grow probably already has cannabis in it now. Number two, when I was a kid, we used to go out into the orchard and steal apples, and they were always covered in spray and they were never ripe, and it was always a disappointment. Um, so probably they're going to get unripe, uncured plants. That'll be a big disappointment. Yes, and those homes probably already have cannabis in them already. However, for foster homes, which are less stable and you know, have a more, they have a different dynamic in them, um, those are prohibited, and that was just to calm that fear. Landlord rights is a huge one. So um, there's a provision in there that landlords can control their property. They can say, no, you can't grow here. I can tell you there's been some objection to that. There's the principle of people should be able to control their own property. There's also the thing of if they think you're gonna grow, just they suspect that, then um, are they gonna keep you from getting an apartment in the first place? Um, But I can tell you if we removed that provision, we would have the Realtors Association swooping down on us with the wrath of God. Um, Seizure and forfeiture was a really important one. There is the way the law is written now, um, police can, if you're growing with it, even if you're growing within the guidelines, police can um, subject you to seizure and forfeiture, and you may be able to go to court and get your stuff back. But that is a huge burden. That is not a good remedy. Um, if we allowed 6 plants or 15 plants, there's still a seizure and forfeiture provision in there, and I'll tell you how this would come up in the real world, and I believe it would. Police should come in and they'll go, I don't know if you're following the rules or not, and they'd seize your stuff. And I know this would not happen in King County, but by God, it would happen in Grant County or Pacific County or, Lincoln County. Um, and they'd say, well, they were doing something wrong, and so we're taking your stuff. So this basically eliminates seizure and forfeiture for 15 plants and below under any circumstances. And I don't know why you'd be seizing property for 15 plants. The other thing too that was really important and was abused is it is required in the law for seizure and forfeiture that the person who possesses it is involved in commercial activity. But there was never any definition to commercial activity. And people and policemen would come in and they go, "Oh, there's baggies there. That's proof that they're bagging it up." And it would be simple as stuff like that. So we put a definition of commercial activity in there, and I think that is a huge critical component. You have to be bartering, selling, something like that. You can't say, oh, well, it was in different piles or we found a box of baggies in the house, which happened routinely. Um, and what else is on the list? Jurisdiction. So this has to do with fiscal notes more than anything. If you go down to the second page, it talks about jurisdiction. And every time they were like, LCB would put in these crazy fiscal notes, which would just kill the bill. And they were based on nothing. And we're like, why are you investigating home grow activity anyway? You're supposed to be investigating regulated activity. And often legislators were confused about this. Um, and so we just got really specific and said they're not going to be involved, which really kind of the first time we did it through LCB for a loop. Then they came and complained, and I created a little hole that said, okay, if you're invited by other police, then you can come and, you know, look at it. And then they threw another huge fiscal note at us again. So basically, this just prohibits LCB from investigating home grow sized activity. And they'll try and say, well, we can't really tell or whatever. I'll tell you one thing, if it's 15 plants, there's no commercial activity going on, right? That's just not a business scale, right? But it's a really important component, and we prohibit it almost exclusively just to keep that ridiculous fiscal note out. Um, and then the local authority was basically, um, I know Reeves was talking about all these bans and cities, and there was an objection we heard a lot that was complete nonsense that um, we're telling people that they don't have to follow the law if we pass home grows, because there are some towns with bans and moratoriums against 502 activity. Um, and so that just clarifies that it doesn't do that. So these are the elements on the checklist. The local authority one did not get into is not in 1449. I would love to see it in there. But these are essentially the elements of the original 1449. When Caitlin showed you the original sheet, she showed the original on that landing page. There's the original bill and the substitute bill, and these are just referring to the original bill, which will be hopefully introduced in the Senate. Are there
Right.
questions associated with any questions on any of this? Did I go through too quickly, or what are you thinking? Did I lose people?
No, I think everybody's here. Thank you, John. And what was I think really helpful as you went through that is that all of those elements are responses to conversations that have been happening over the last 8 years
Right.
plus. So one of the things, the reasons why sometimes a law takes as long as it does, like Al had said, on average 6 to 7 years for a new law to pass at the state level. It's because a lot of times you don't know what the objections are until you put it out there into the public, and then you get folks signing up, and new concerns and considerations start cropping up. Some of them really legitimate stuff that, for whatever reason, in your process of getting that first iteration of the bill out there, just didn't consider yet and are worthwhile adding in. Sometimes those can be attended to by amendments. Sometimes there's not enough time, and that's just got to be a part of a new version of the bill that comes forward next time around. And so, because this bill has been worked through the legislature for so many years, and in particular with some really staunch detractors who are looking for every reason to poke a hole in the logic of the bill, we've had the opportunity to come up with a level of confidence of elements that need to be in the bill to sort of address concerns that are also not overly restrictive, so that we can make sure that this is, you heard John talking about considerations like streamlining with medical, so that we keep law enforcement out of this as much as possible, give them all the reasons to not engage that we can, well, and also clearly defining where municipal interference and then LCB oversight is or is not involved in this home grow as well. Um, right now, Senator Saldana has signed up to sponsor the Senate version. Um, Perfect, Jamie. Thank you. Now, in years past, I've referenced sort of some drama. I don't know that I want to get too much into the drama, but what we've run into in the House are sometimes inexperienced testifiers testifying, and then a legislator whose number one priority in that circumstance was to get people testifying to say wild things to sort of make this bill
Right.
look unserious. And so I want to take this opportunity that should you decide to testify or work with us on testimony, and if you want to testify in anything, please reach out. We are not interested in gatekeeping testimony. Sometimes we will say, listen, we're trying to not take up too much time, and we've got this slate of experts that we'd like to testify. If you could submit written testimony and sign in support of the bill, like that would be the better way to do this. But of course, if anybody anytime has anything that they want to say directly to folks, we want you to say that. And we're here to help to make sure that you are finding the most effective way of communicating the message that you want to communicate. And that's not always passionately, right? Sometimes it is passionately, but not always passionately. And so, should you choose to testify, what I will always say is that if a legislator ever asks a question when you are in that testifying position and it's an answer you don't know, or it's sort of a speculative question. A lot of times, speculative questions are designed to get you to say something you don't intend to say for the purposes of hurting the bill. And or if you're asked a question that you don't know the answer to, making an answer up is never the right choice. The legislators aren't going to move on. The best answer is always, I'll get back to you about that. And then you can always send an email following that testimony. Um, can I get a
That's an
show of
excellent
hands?
point.
Sorry,
Go
go ahead,
ahead.
John. Yeah.
I think that's a really excellent point, Caitlin. If you don't know, say, I don't know. Or something better, if you know who else knows, say, I bet Caitlin knows, because you're
In
opening the
fact,
door.
I got to do that on Homegrow this time. They were trying to catch me in an interesting one, and it was an LCB answer to a question. They asked me, I was like, I don't actually know. Perhaps LCB might be able to answer that a little bit
Right.
better.
Right.
And that
What Caitlin said is really important. There is, and this does happen, sometimes legislators who are opposed to it and want to make it look non-serious, the effort look non-serious, they will intentionally ask questions of people who they think will give dumb answers or ill-informed answers or, you know,
passionate, but maybe not helpful answers.
right, right.
Can I
Would
get a
like,
show of hands? We're going to
oh,
do
you do.
at the end of each seminar. Can I get a show of hands of folks who are really interested in this particular piece of legislation and would like to be kept apprised of efforts around testimony and sort of detailed strategy as we jump in? All right, I got a couple. I see Fortuna and Mike, Dave.
So what do you got against Homegrow, Matt?
Matt's already going to be kept informed. All of our board
I'm,
members are,
Hey
on
now, come on.
anyways. Oh, and Jamie. Thank you, Jamie.
yeah.
Jamie Osborne as well. We will make sure that you are a part of those. In particular, testimony for this bill is always really interesting, and it's we've got a couple of different strategy tactics, hearing both from licensees in terms of any concerns over the impact that Homegrow might have. Often we have a grower or two testify about the importance of Homegrow for maintaining diverse genetics and things again that are not commercially viable, perhaps genetic material that may not be commercially viable, but still really crucial to ensuring that the survival of the plant. Also on that patient side of things, we like to hear from folks. And then there is some tension again with some retail stores, not all. I've spoken to plenty of retailers that are in full support of this, understanding that the ecosystem needs home grow for it to go. But there is some concern that this would compete with retail stores. We commissioned a study, an economic impact study in 2020 that took a look at that. And what the study found was that home grow, just like home brewing, is actually supportive of the commercial market in that, hobby growing is hard. It is
That's
not a
really,
replacement for being able to go to the store. And in fact, people who engage in home cultivation are more likely to buy more plants at a higher price point and more often. Or sorry, not plants, products, again, at a higher price point and more often. Actually raising the ceiling on potential revenue to the state and to retail stores, if we were to allow this, not to mention all of the ancillary things like growing products and just genetics in general, sales to people who would be engaged in home grow. Yeah,
So
exactly.
can I throw in one thing?
Yeah.
So you were talking about having responses to questions and dialing in the bill, and I believe evidence that we're dialing the bill in better and answering more objections is that recently, last year, at a whole new height, opponents were just lying.
Right.
And I haven't quite seen it at that level before,
Yeah.
where almost everybody got up and just they lied. And I was kind of startled by that. But I think they're banking on the fact that um, the legislators might not know that what's true and untrue. If you run into that, it's nice to be prepared for what they might say. I make a mental note of about what it was, but I also follow up. I go home and I'm always mad, which may not be the best time to write, but I go home and I write responses to those and I fact check them. And you may have noticed last time I went through testimony, I had a 3-page response to everybody who got up and lied. And
Yeah, and
and
I will
I
say
just
too, and I'm so sorry, we are a little bit over our time
yeah.
already, but I think that's a really important thing, and I think to call out there, John, too, is that in the hearing room in particular, we never want to get in fights with folks over things
Right,
like
right.
factual information. Those are always great opportunities to do exactly what John's talking about. Catalog it, then go home, find the, information to sort of disprove what was being said, and then do a follow-up. A lot of times then too, that's the kind of work that Al does. We'll put Al on that and say, hey, can you please have these one-on-one conversations? And he can do his magic finesse, and make sure that it's not just a, hey, they lied, because nobody wants to be in the middle of that noise.
Yeah,
But
that's
instead
not the right
saying, hey,
tone.
just, I think you might have gotten some incorrect information. I'd like to share some resources with you, answer any questions. Here's some better, more accurate information from reliable sources, etc. Fortuna, I
I,
see your hand up. I just want to make sure
yeah.
you have a comment or question, or is that just still up from wanting to stay informed? Awesome.
I have to say, I was really appreciative that when I sent that email out, Cindy Ryu, Representative Ryu, sent that email to all of her colleagues. So I know it had an impression on her. So I felt pretty gratified by that.
Thank you, John, so much for talking us through that home grow bill. We are going to pause here. I don't know who's hungry. I am personally, and so we're going to take a little bit of a lunch break. We're going to come back right around 2:45, 2:50. We'll make sure that we give it.
245?
Excuse me. Just kidding. I was looking at the break. 1 o'clock is our intention. About 1:05-ish to talk about municipal relations. This is based on some legislation, but we're looking a little bit more comprehensively, broadly, from a policy perspective when we come back to talk about that. Thank you, everybody, so far for the morning.